I'm joined now for our Mart panel discussion by Ray Doyle of the Irish Cooperative Organisation Society, Jim Dockery from Farm Relief Services, and Pat Griffin from the HSA. Pat, if I can just start with you, can you just outline the risk levels that are there in marts?
Yeah, well, if you look at farm deaths, first of all, and you look at livestock, they are the third major cause of farm deaths. Actually, 13% of farmers that are killed on farms are killed by livestock. And then when you look at a mart situation, it's a very unnatural situation for livestock. They're in unfamiliar territory, there's noise, there's generally confusion. They're not sometimes with their peers that they've been in groups for a long time, so they can get more flighty and a lot more risky. So what's happened actually in the last number of years, we've had a fatal accident in a mart a few years ago, and we had a coroner's inquest, and he made certain recommendations. And in the last couple of years, we've had some very, very serious accidents at marts. So we've had to move in relation to looking at marts and what the controls are within the mart. And we're actually very, very concerned about the mixing of farmers walking around pens and workers in the mart trying to move cattle from pens to the sales ring or wherever within the mart. It shouldn't be mixed. It's something that is a known risk, and it has to be managed properly. So we've tried to work with the marts. We're trying to work with Ray and his organisation in trying to improve standards. We're not doing it to try to make life more difficult for anyone. It's really to make life safer for everyone in the mart and to the employees on the mart as well.
Ray, an accident at Mohill Mart earlier this year really brought this issue to the front page, where a man was there was a serious bull attack and a man was airlifted to hospital. Ray, can you just outline the changes that are being proposed and have been introduced at some marts?
Well, yes, just as regard that, there was a very serious accident in April in Revo marts, and Revo reacted in a very exemplary way because they shut down the marts pending a full health and safety review. And indeed, their reaction to it is more or less the gold standard now for health and safety for the rest of the country, because they have enacted a shutdown of the penning areas and livestock areas while livestock are being moved. So the only people that are in direct contact with livestock are trained drovers rather than members of the public, because as Pat has outlined, any time livestock and people, be trained or otherwise, are interacting, there is a risk, albeit smaller for trained people, but it doesn't matter. When animals are in an environment that's alien to them, they can react in unpredictable ways. So yes, the Revo incident prompted the industry to come together and be more focused on it. However, we were focused on it for the last number of years because our insurance premiums were rising drastically as a result of claims and a result of accidents. So something had to change on just a purely financial reason, but always the health and safety reason is the primary one, to obviously make sure people are protected at all times, be that members of the public or otherwise. So that has led us, since the accident in Mohill, the industry is meeting. We meet every 2 months now, but it is a work in progress. As I've just outlined, the Revo has what I would contend to be the gold standard of health and safety now, but there are 15 marts in the West with a similar standard of essentially a mart lockdown. The farmer simply backs his animals up to the intake, and the trained staff take care of the animals, and at no time are animals and people interacting and mixing. Now, while that is the gold standard, it is not possible in some of the smaller, older marts. But even those marts are reacting in a very positive way and making changes, such as putting in safe refuge areas where people can escape and be protected if animals are being moved, or maybe taking on extra staff to minimise the amount of interaction that people have with the livestock. So it is a work in progress, most definitely, and it was definitely prompted to be a more priority, for mart boards and mart managers throughout 2018. But it is going in the positive direction, and we are minimising the interaction between livestock and people, and that ultimately is the summary of it. As long as we can maybe separate livestock from people, we have minimised the risk of an accident happening.
Jim, can you describe historically the levels of safety in marts, or how much was it? How much of an issue was it? How was it? How was it promoted? Just can you describe the situation over the years up to this point?
Yeah, I suppose, Claire, if you look at the marts, some of them were built anything between 30 and 60 years ago. They were built for a whole different type of animal than we have currently at the moment. Animals were handled more, there were less in numbers. And in recent years, we've changed that whole structure of farming, where you have animals coming in, particularly the likes of weanlings, which are taken directly off the cow on a Monday evening, taken straight into a mart somewhere. They've never been on a trailer before, they've never been away from their mother before. There's a lot of noise, a lot of activity, and then they're unloaded into a changed surroundings. And we do our training with mart staff. You look at the behaviour of animals and the surrounding structure, all that influences the animal's behaviour, and it can make them, I suppose they're scared, basically, is the best way to put it, and it's a whole new surrounding for them. So we've seen over the years where the height of the isolation pin and most of the pens in the mart have been raised up. We've seen situations in, for example, some of the Cork marts where the farmer with their elbows around the ring have been pushed back out because people had sticks in the rings. And so there's a lot of, in the last 7 or 8 years in particular, maybe the last 10 years, there's been a lot of infrastructure changes there to make it safer, and they're continuously doing that. Difficulty, of course, we have an old mart that's there, it's going back to the 60s or the 70s or whatever, the cost of doing that. So you'll see marts doing section by section, and that's proven to be very well. And the other thing, I suppose, from a handling point of view, an animal handling point of view, with the staff in the mart, some of the gates designs were poor there in the sense that it was designed for one flow system, so the animals were coming from the chutes into the pens. It was designed okay that, but then we're going from the pens through the rings. The gate was maybe opened the wrong way, and it meant that the animals had to come out, take a turn and go back. So with the new design that's going into marts over recent years, they're able to redesign that better and make it much safer. And of course you have the catwalks and all that kind of area as well. So I suppose what Ray is saying as well, you know, I think there's a statistic that I've spoken to several of the mart managers, somewhere around 20% of the people at marts are buying and selling. The other 80 are there as spectators or visitors on a social. So when you have that scenario there are people there, and all they're in for is a chat, and that's fine, and that's very important. But you can't expect them then to be in the livestock scenario where you have people and livestock in that mix. And I suppose what the process and what will work is that gradually you have to change that kind of behaviour and that structure where people can look at their animals, get their animals in, but they have a certain length of time, and then once the animals start moving to the rings in for the sale, that they have to be out of the way for them. One of the marts, just for example, where we implemented this the first day, the guys were saying, we're at this for 40 years and we never had such a pleasant evening working, where they didn't have to worry about the public. They were able to move the animals, so there's 2 or 3 yard staff moving the animals from the pens to the rings. They never had such pleasure. And there were years and years doing that because they're always watching out people and telling people to get. That's hard. It's hard enough to handle animals and move them without having to be worried about people in your way as well. So I think it's a very positive step.
Jim, Pat, as Jim mentioned there is the business element and the social element to the mart. For the average farmer, is the risk recognised, or has it been recognised historically?
No, I don't think so. I think farmers work with livestock all the time, and they might be some way blasé about it, that they're always around animals and they don't see the risk as much as we would see it from the outside. I think there is a slow realisation now, though, that animals in marts are in an unnatural environment and there are more risks. And I think farmers are starting to accept what we're doing at marts. In relation to the places Jim mentions that are historical marts and are difficult to change, we're going to work with the sector. We are planning an inspection campaign in 2019 of marts to try to bring them up to these gold standards. We will be practical about it. In marts where it is difficult, we'll work with them to try to bring them on. We're not going to be going in and laying down the law in places where it's very, very, very difficult to deal with. We'll bring them along slowly, but it has to change. We can't have farmers or anyone at risk at marts, whether they're workers at the marts or the farmers. And I think if we do the campaign sensibly, give the information to the mart managers in relation to where we want them to go, and they can make a plan on how they're going to go there. And if we see that they're going to make reasonable steps over a period of time to get to that gold standard, we will work with them.
Ray, how many marts have now introduced the new changes, and how are they adjusting to it? Are you noticing differences in terms of the larger marts and the smaller marts? Is it more difficult for the smaller mart to adjust?
No, not necessarily. And again, it's a point maybe I didn't make earlier. There is definitely a regional variation in the approach taken. For example, the marts in the west and the northwest, etc., they sell an awful lot of suckler bred stock, and they are more unpredictable, more prone to acting in unpredictable manners compared to actually the marts in the south and the east that are selling dairy stock. So they have a different approach because the animals are different and they're more docile. So they have had to react to that quicker than the marts down the south and the east, because the marts in the south and the east did not have the same pressures of accidents occurring because the animals just tended to be more docile. Now, that is not a reason at all that they're not going to enact a certain degree of lockdown, but they have other changes in mind for a start. And as Pat says, it'll be an incremental change. We can't just snap our fingers and every single mart is a catwalk in the country, because that will close more than half the marts, and that would be unfair for a business that is there for the last 60 years. And the custom and practice, it always takes time to change a custom and practice and a culture, and that's what we're doing now. And some of your commentary just before we started on this was, this will close marts, this is deleterious to marts. I would contend it's going to be the saviour of marts, because animals will be handled in a safe way, they'll be marketed in a safe way, and the other advantages of the mart be that the social aspect can still be saved, because we don't want to kill the mart unnecessarily. But having said that, health and safety has to be our paramount focus here. But there are compromises, I think, that can be made to ensure health and safety. But some of these smaller centres won't, you're right, have the financial wherewithal to maybe put in catwalks, but they don't have to have a catwalk. There is other methods of actually ensuring that livestock and people remain separated. So therefore, they will do that, and each centre will have its own individual response to this.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. It's a space we're all going to be watching very, very closely. Thank you all for joining us today.